There we go.
There we go.
Hi, Rachel. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Rhoda.
Yeah. So, welcome. This is Inside Fashion Design, part of the Conscious Fashion Design Academy. And we're super excited to have so many wonderful instructors and coaches guiding us along the way, you being one of them. And your specialty is tech design. And so, today's session, Technical Design Fundamentals, What You Need to Know, is a great one for someone who is maybe expanding their knowledge, working in as a tech designer, or probably applying to product development as well, but also for the person that just wants to understand the process and what it takes to fit a garment and get those samples made and all of those are kind of the key ingredients, right, for a successful
Yes.
product. So I'm very excited to have you share your knowledge with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is such a great way to, like, even if you're not interested in being a technical designer yourself, it's such a great way to learn about what your teammates are doing, because the more that we understand what our teammates are doing around us, the better teammate we can be and the better we are in our own job. So this is also a really great tool for you to just kind of learn what technical design is all about and what we get into. So let's dive right in. I wanted to tell you first a little bit about me. So I started my career with a lot of internships, and it was really a blessing because I got to learn really fast what I really loved to do in our industry, but also what I really didn't love to do in our industry. And I remember sitting at a sewing machine at the Abercrombie and Fitch offices, sewing like a little mock-up of a label with these teeny little ribbons. And I was picking out like thread colors that needed to be just perfect, and sitting there thinking, this is not for me. It's not for me to be on the creative side of things. I had just come off of a technical design internship, and I was like, I want to go back over there so badly and just start working on patterns and tech packs again. So I think that was a really big wake up call to me. And if you are really into patterns and maybe you like resonated with math a little bit, and when you were in fashion school, maybe your favorite was draping or getting into Adobe Illustrator, I think this is going to be really interesting for you to see that there is an entire career out there. And so I spent 15 years in the corporate apparel industry working as a technical designer, evolving into a developer role, and eventually taking on some product management and business leadership roles, which allowed me in 2021 to take all of that knowledge and all of those vast skills, and I started my own consulting company. So I went out into the world. I called my company Unmarked Street, which comes from Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go. There's a line in there that says, you will come to a place where the streets are not marked. And that is how Unmarked Street was born.
I was so curious about that. I love that. It's a great story.
Yeah, I loved it too. And so I went out there. I thought I was going to do some freelance work. And within about 6 months, I had so much freelance work on my plate that I needed to start hiring a team. And we have since become an agency where we can now provide a wide array of services to our clients. I have my own podcast, and we are now just getting out there, like sharing all of the knowledge that we have, revealing the secrets of the big billion-dollar brands, getting that information into smaller brands' hands, and with a lot of our educational tools, which is the business of apparel.
Yeah, that's so great to mention. And number one, going back to the internships, I'll say too, same from experience. And I work with a lot of younger designers or students, and they're often unsure, or they think they want to do this, and then they start doing it, and it's not for them. So I say just keep going and try different things, because some of the best way you can figure that out is by just going into those roles and realizing, okay, I'm not so much a hand sketcher and I don't really like the actual design, but I love math.
Yeah.
You can still be involved in fashion in a very, in-depth way with the skills that you do like.
Absolutely.
So that's such a great thing to mention, and be patient. It takes time to figure those things out. So
It does. Yeah. And I think the thing that's really important about internships that I wish someone had said to me when I was doing them is, like, that's your time to try everything out, just like you said, but also to make a lot of mistakes and like testing things. And nobody expects you to be an expert when you're an intern. And so make the mistakes, learn from them, ask a zillion questions. This is your time to learn. And so I 100% agree with that, Broda.
yeah, absolutely. Don't be afraid to make mistakes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yes. So a little more about our company. We're an elite consulting agency now for emerging performance apparel brands. That's kind of where my niche is. I'm a cyclist, I'm a triathlete, and so we definitely focus on performance apparel. Our team has more than 55 years of collective experience that we now bring to our clients. And then we love to place a huge emphasis on helping our community through learning just like this. And so my big technical design background in my career, I think, was really fun. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. I love technical design so much. So I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. I started my life as a very creative introvert. I
Mm.
liked to be in my own room, creating something, doing flower arrangements, doing paintings, doing whatever. And so I decided to go to the University of Cincinnati. They have an amazing program there called DAP, which is Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning. And I got my fashion design degree in 2007. I started my career as a pattern engineer and a technical designer, and eventually evolved through many different roles, many different brands. Like I said earlier, I went from technical designer to developer. And a little bit later in this session, I'll kind of outline what the difference is between those two things. Although you should also know they're very interchangeable in our world
Mhm.
today. A lot of people will say developer and they mean tech designer and vice versa. So, to me, technical design was very much about running fittings, building tech packs, doing pattern engineering. And so we'll talk about that a lot today. Development was a lot more about factory communication and organization and keeping bills of material really buttoned up. And so getting both sides of that and really mastering both of those skills helped me become a manager at one point, to start leading and then taking on a bunch of different roles. And now I am an agency CEO. I'm working as a fractional COO for different brands, helping them put their operations together and figure out all their processes, and sharing and teaching all of those different secrets that I've learned.
It's amazing. It's a very, very well versed in all of the phases. And I'll mention, depending on the type of business company you're working for, if you're a larger corporation, there are developers and then there's tech
Yes.
designers, and if
Yes,
it's a smaller brand, then you could be both. So
exactly.
yeah, there could be a different role depending on where you're working, and having the knowledge of each will be very helpful.
Yeah, and even just knowing that there's a difference, so that even when you show up to an interview and you're knowledgeable enough to be asking the right questions about what parts of the job you need to be doing, is really
Mhm.
going to help you rise to the top of that resume list, because you're going to be knowledgeable enough to know what questions to ask. And so those kinds of things can be really important too.
For sure.
So today we're going to go through what is technical design. And I'm going to just really quickly kind of recapture technical design. To me, is all about making the garment fit the body properly. And I don't think enough brands that we've even been talking about since starting my consulting agency, I don't think enough brands really realize how important fit is. So at Unmarked Street, we realize that the number one reason people are going to come back to your brand over and over again is if you can provide them with a great fitting garment. If
Mhm.
something is comfortable, if the fabrics feel good, and if it ends up being their favorite because it fits their body just right, you're going to get them to come back to your brand and find those pieces over and over again. Whereas if you don't focus on fit and you don't focus on quality of fit, you're going to find that you're going to be losing customers faster than you're keeping them. So
Mhm.
we really want to focus on that. That's our main goal as technical designers, is making sure that every garment that we put out fits a body properly.
Mhm.
We're going to go
And
through a tech pack template review. We're going to go through some garment fitting basics. And then I'm also just going to talk a little bit about pattern engineering partnerships and how important that is. So building the perfect tech pack. I'm going to walk you through a couple different things here. We're going to toggle between the tech pack template that we're going to be gifting you with this course. So we have a tech pack template on our website that you can go purchase right now. If you have already purchased this course or you're watching it, that means that it has also been gifted to you for free. So what I'm going to show you here is the template, what you're seeing like when you actually download that file, and then how you should be filling it out once you get into it.
Mm.
So this is when you get into your cover page. What we're looking for here is a very basic black and white flat sketch. This is usually created in Adobe Illustrator. A lot of people will take like a hand-drawn sketch, or what we call a napkin sketch, and they'll trace it out and make it look symmetrical and make it look really dialed in Adobe Illustrator. This is here also where you want to include all of your different information in the header. And having a cover page header is really important to make sure that your factory sees all of the information that they need to see right up front. A lot of times when you go to a factory and you're working with them, you'll notice that they have like a binder or a specific folder that's just there for your brand. And every single top page in that binder is going to be your tech pack cover page so that they can see exactly what they're doing for you and your brand at a glance. So we want to include as much as we can here. So style number is typically an internal number that your brand will assign to a piece or a garment. It's different from a UPC code, which will indicate a barcode that's going to go on your sticker so that if you're in a shop, you can scan that barcode. It goes into the system. This item has been purchased. It's also different from a SKU number, which was usually a smart number that will indicate what type of product it is, what color it is, and what size it is.
Mhm.
Our inside style numbers tend to just tell us and our factory what is the style we're working on. And the reason we want to do that and not just assign a style name is because, let's say 70% of the time, you're probably working with a factory whose first language is not the same as yours. And so numbers are universal. We can use numbers and we can refer to numbers a lot easier across international barriers and across language barriers. So you'll probably notice that when you send both a style number and a style name to your factory, they're going to want to use the number quite a bit more. So come up with a system that makes sense for you. For this one, this was like our spring 24, our 11th style in the line that was going to be new for that season.
Yeah, I know based on my own experience, we would just kind of make them up.
Yeah.
And you could do it like you said, if it's a spring 25, you might do 025 001, or tops are number 1, bottoms are number 2, and you just 001. So you
Yep.
can easily kind of make up your own system and just, keep a good record and a spreadsheet of, the number and then what that style is, description, and it's acceptable that way. It's just what really works for you. So it's not a, specific system. It's you can create that yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. And yes, and some brands who get really into this will create smart style numbers as well. Like I remember when I was at Abercrombie, anything that started with a 1 was a women's style, anything that started with a 2 was a men's style, and then we had so many different categories. And so I remember being the second digit kind of in our style number indicated outerwear. And so we had the whole alphabet kind of in use with all the different categories that we had. And then it went further on to what season was it? What type of outerwear piece was it? And then I think there were a couple of other indicators in that actual smart number. So when we were reading it and the factory was reading it, we knew exactly what we were working on, which was also really cool. But that's kind of above and beyond. You don't have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good example though of how people do it, and it's just super important to be able to track it, even if you're only
Yeah.
doing 5 styles. If you're talking
Yes.
to a factory, you need that style number because that's, like you said, it's the universal language and they'll know what you're referring to. So
Exactly. Exactly. So then we put in some other basic information. Again, this is spring 24, so we're going to put that into our season. This is a season/release date. So if you're maybe not working on seasons and you're just working on like various drops throughout the year, you can put a date in there that says, we're going to drop this style on June 1st throughout the year. And then that will help your factory know and your team know what date, like what final date are we really aiming for on this style. Your design contact. So who can your team go ahead and contact if there are design questions? Your pattern contact, your development contact. And then we also want to get into any pattern references. So do we have a fit block? If you have a series of patterns in your database, basically, that indicates your basics. So every time we start a t-shirt, we start with our t-shirt block is what we call it. Or every time we start a new tight, we have a tight block. And that's a fit that we've honed in over probably a year or so. And we've made sure that it is perfect. Now, you can always start with a block. You're always going to have to make some tweaks to it based on whether or not you have a new fabric or whether or not you have new features. But it's always nice to start with a block if you have one. And then we're going to give them the pattern file name so that they know exactly what they're looking for in their database. We're going to list out the factory so that they know and we know exactly who we're talking to. our sample status, which is changeable. So every time you go in to update your tech pack, you want to make a copy and then you want to update the sample status. How many colorways are we offering here? What is our sample size? So if you're asking for a prototype, what size are they making you? What is the full size range that you're going to be offering in production so that they know how to set up their marker and how to set up a grade rule for you? If you have a target price for them, I recommend putting it in here. That really helps us work with our factories right up front. So the first time they get a tech pack from us, they can see, I need this t-shirt to essentially cost $7.50 coming out of the factory. And if that's not workable because I chose a $12 fabric, we can start talking about that right away instead of leaving it for way too late down the timeline.
Yeah. And if you switch a fabric, it affects your fit and you're kind of starting over again.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Could I ask you a question about your sample size?
Yeah.
So a couple things to consider is if you are going to do maybe a photo garment and
Yep.
obviously you're going to be fitting it on a real body. So if you have a fit model that's a size 4, or if she's a size 10, that is what you want your sample size to be so that everything can be put on that person.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is ideal if you have a consistent fit model from fit phase to fit phase, so that you are always at least keeping that consistent. And we also like to recommend that your sample size, if possible, if you can find the right body to put it on, is right in the middle of your grade. And so this is maybe a typical grade where we're offering just extra small through 2XL. So medium would be right in the middle. We have a lot of brands who are starting to offer amazing extended sizes. And so they might go all the way from extra small to 6X. And so they might determine that their medium is actually a extra large. There are a few other ways to do that too. You can actually divide those out. So I have my base sizing and the middle of that is a medium. And then I have my extending sizing and the middle of that is a 4X. So you're actually getting 2 sizes. There are multiple ways that different brands do that. But yes, choosing a size that you can actually throw on a body every time is crucial.
Yeah.
You want to indicate to them probably how many units you plan to purchase when you get into the production range. This comes from your product manager's forecast and then the latest revision date. So when you're updating that sample status, you're also putting today's date in there. Next, we're going to get into colorway sketches and detail sketches. And so this is a great example of a colorway sketch that you want to use. You want to take that black and white sketch, you want to put the color that's in there. Any shadowing that you're going to do is going to go ahead and live in this file. And then your detail sketches are going to look similar, but you're going to start to call out all of the different construction details that you want on this style. Now, this particular page is kind of showing a codified way of doing that, where we've actually pointed to various numerical codes that then read down to the bottom of the page that describes exactly what that code means. There are some really elevated ways of doing this, where if you have a series of numerical codes, let's say C1 was a collar construction that is a standard for us that we use on every single t-shirt. And C2 was a standard collar construction for our jackets. We could create a vendor manual with all of the different detail sketches calling out, this is exactly what we mean when we say C1. This is exactly what we mean when we say C2. And then all of our detail sketches use those codes and it makes it very clean looking, just like this. Your vendor has to have both tools though. They have to have your tech pack and that vendor manual to be able to read back to each other. Mm-hmm. A lot of other brands will just use arrows and words. There will just be text all over this document saying, I need this kind of stitch here. This is how we want the hem to be folded back. And you can just go ahead and write that out. The advantage of having something that's codified and something that is part of a vendor manual is that, again, if you're working with a factory where your language is not their first language, they can translate it once and then go back to it over and over again, as opposed to having to translate your tech packs with all of those different words around them many, many times.
Every time. Yeah. Yeah, we're working on something called an actual session that we're going to do coming up is creating your design toolbox.
Yes.
Which is similar to the manual. And that in our design toolbox, we're going to have branding and labels and the stitch details and all of that. So that's such a great thing to have, even if you're a small brand, because you can obviously, like you mentioned, you just share that with everyone and they'll know what the branding looks like and what the rules are for maybe logo placement and all the construction details as well.
Yeah, and that also helps to create like a cohesive look for your brand. If you're setting standards like that and you're not doing something different every single time you design a new
Mhm.
style, if you have a few collar constructions that you always use, a few zipper constructions that you always use, labeling and branding, just like you said, that you always use, people will start to recognize your brand in a different way, and it will all of a sudden be automatic. Like someone will watch someone walking down the street and say, "Oh, that's that brand. I know it is because I've
Yes.
seen that before."
Yep.
And that's the kind of thing that you want to create for your brand too. So those are great toolboxes to have.
Rachel, can I ask a question about
Yeah.
is this in Excel, or are you using a specific program, product management system for creating these documents, these pages?
All of these pages right now are built in Excel or Google Sheets. So
Okay.
I'm a big believer in using Excel or Google Sheets for a lot of the further pages that we're going to get into. A lot of the sketches that we're building, though, they're all built in Adobe Illustrator.
Yeah.
So we build our flat sketches in Adobe Illustrator, and then we essentially take screenshots or snapshots of those pages and import them as images into our Excel document in this way. There are some people who like to create entire tech packs in Adobe Illustrator. I find that to be very tricky, and you also can't have any formulas in Adobe Illustrator that help you like determine your grade rule or anything like that. So
Yeah.
that's why I encourage all of my clients to move everything into Excel.
Mhm.
But you definitely do want to have really professional looking sketches, and Illustrator is still the best tool for that, I believe.
Yeah. And Excel and Google Sheets is accessible to anyone, so you don't need a fancy
Right.
program to achieve this kind of setup with your documents.
Agreed. Now, if you're working at a corporate company, you might have access to a product line management system or a PLM system
Mhm.
that allows you to upload all of these documents basically into that software system. But that is very elevated. Those programs are typically quite expensive. And so most of us, I think, are typically still functioning out of Excel and Google Sheets.
So another question. If you're a very small designer, maybe you're not even a real designer, but you have an idea, you're gonna make a T-shirt and, you just want to you still wanna get it to the factory. Can you do a hand sketch and kinda screenshot that and put it in, as clean as possible, or what would be your recommendation if maybe someone doesn't have Illustrator, or they're really, like I said, they're not truly a designer with that experience, but or maybe using photographs or sample
Yeah.
garments? You have some advice about
Yeah,
they would go about it
absolutely.
that way?
So a couple things there. Number one, yes, your factory can usually interpret what you're looking for based off of a hand sketch. If you can do like kind of close up, like blown up detail sketches as well by hand, that will be very helpful. If you do have any photographs of things that you like I really like this pocket on this jacket, but I love the hood on this style. If you can take photos of those things and include those in your tech pack, that's going to be incredibly helpful to your factory. If you can send those samples to them, that's going to be a bonus. That's even going to help even more. But I will say, I find that it's really important to make sure that at some point before you go into production, you make sure that your tech pack is as professional and buttoned up as possible.
Mhm.
And so, either replacing all of that work with finalized samples that you're approving to production, those photos saying this is exactly what I've approved, or hiring a freelancer or hiring someone to help you build your tech pack. At the end of the day, your tech pack becomes your contract with your factory. It
Mhm.
helps you to say, this is what I signed off on. This is what I'm asking for. This is what I expect out of my production. And I have seen in my career in the past where if we didn't actually have certain things in the tech pack, the factory didn't do it. We would get our production samples in and we would then call them and say, well, this is missing. This wasn't correct. Like we need to charge back for these samples, or we want to get a discount on them as B grade. And the factory said it wasn't in your tech pack.
Yeah.
And so we had no legs to stand on to actually go back and ask for that discount, which is why I really believe that if you are going to go to production, you're going to commit a lot of money to buying inventory from a certain factory, that you make sure your factory tech pack is as buttoned up as possible, as professional as possible, as detailed as possible, so that you do have repercussions and you have legs to stand on if that ever happens to you.
Yeah, and it's worth the investment to hire someone even to just do that Illustrator sketch
Yes.
because of the efficiencies and all the things that can happen in the long run. So
Yeah.
to your point
Yeah.
of, yeah, it would be worth the investment.
Absolutely, and if you do that, make sure that you ask them for the Illustrator file,
You
so
own
that
it.
they are sending it to you. But if you
Mhm.
paid for it, that is yours, and they should absolutely be providing that. And then you can either figure out how to manipulate some small things in there, or you can at least have the file to send to another freelancer or someone else. Or if you eventually hire someone to come onto your team and do technical design or development, you own that file.
And that made me think of this too, is you will have a fill
Yes.
layer in there. So if you have someone really draw it properly and have a fill later, you'll be able to add all your colorways
Yep.
in later on and have put that into a line plan, or, the SKUs of all the different colors. So super important to
Very.
invest in that for sure.
Absolutely. So next up is super important as well. Your bill of materials is going to list out every single bit and bob that you are going to actually need on this style. So you're going to list out all of the different fabrics that you need on this style. If there are multiple fabrics, you want to make sure that you're calling out exactly what they are, the details, the mill codes, everything that your factory is going to need to reach out to that mill and order the fabric properly. And then you want to tell them exactly where all of it should be placed and what color goes on which colorway of the garment. And so all of that gets included in this bill of materials here. If you have a very specific thread that you want to call out for certain areas, you want to list that here. All of your trims need to be included. All of your packaging needs to be included, all the way down to like the swift tack that's going to attach the hang tag to your garment so that they can see it through the poly bag. All of those different items need to be listed on here so that when you're rolling up your costing, number one, you can see what it should cost. And number two, your factory knows exactly every element that needs to be included in that garment. And I've been watching a couple of other freelancers talk about bills of materials recently. And one freelancer in particular, her name is Heidi Weinberg. Some of you might know her. So Heidi, she
Mhm.
just did a post recently where she actually reached out and asked a bunch of different people to send her examples of their bills of material. And I was reading it just kind of chuckling because she said she was so shocked at how many people were missing so many elements in their bills of material. And so you want to make sure that this is as detailed as possible, again, because this is your contract with your factory. And if it's not on here, and they miss it, you're going to have no legs to stand on and push back on them.
So what if you don't know your packaging, like the poly bag, or you don't know about the Swift tag? Can you just put in there, like factory
Yep.
sourced, or ask the factory to tell you, okay, is there a style number for the poly bag that I could put in here? So there's
Yes.
ways to get that information because you're probably not going to know what poly bag
Exactly. Yeah, you
options
might
there
not
are.
know everything. And a
Mhm.
lot of us will go out and say, "Hey, factory, help me source, yeah, the poly bag or the Swift tack or whatever it is, some of the smaller items."
Mhm.
Some of us even will say, "Hey, factory, help me source the fabric for this. Like, I really like this fabric. I'm going to send you a sample. Can you find something similar?" Just make sure that before you go into production, just like Britta said, you've asked them what those codes are and you get that into your tech pack so that you own and know that information.
Yeah, and a lot of times the factories will have their partners already. So they have these relationships built up. They're not starting something from scratch like you might be. And if all the fabric people that they're already used to working with could have exactly what you're looking for, and maybe local too, like it's in the same city. So transportation is easier than
Yep,
shipping in from Italy or something like that. So
exactly. Yeah.
that's a good point to really work with the factory and say, hey, these are things that I'm really looking for. What's in your local vicinity? So that also reduces your cost and shipping time and lead time and all of those things. So a lot of
All of those
benefits.
things. It reduces your carbon footprint too. I mean, the less that we're transporting things across countries and everything can be localized just a little bit, all of that goes toward your sustainability plan at your brand.
Yeah, and I'll mention though too, make sure you do your research and
Yes.
that you still know where they're coming from, and because there's still a lot of like hidden, fabric makers or something you don't know for sure. So really do your due diligence and find out, kind of is trace as much as you can, even, if it's coming from them, just making sure it's certified
Yes.
and those kind of requirements so that you know what you're getting.
Yeah, and you can ask for third-party testing through companies like SGS. I would also recommend that you never allow anything to go into your garment unless you've seen it, touched it, and approved
Mhm.
it. So make sure that they're sending you all of those items or they're putting them on your samples as you're reviewing samples so that you can say, oh, yeah, this is good. I'm happy with this.
Yeah. I this keeps popping into my mind. Popping thread. You
Yes.
mentioned thread because we've had the experience too of not okay, maybe you're saying like black thread or thread dyed to match, the fabric,
Mhm.
the solid color. So they'll put on a black thread on a black performance tight and it's a non-stretch thread and
Mhm.
then you get your sample and it's popping. All the threads are breaking because
Yep.
it's regular thread that has no give, so there's also specific threads if you're working on an athletic garment, technical garment, stretch, even if it's a shirt, but it's stretchy, a t-shirt, you want to make sure the thread quality is going to do what you want. So it's not a simple just, oh, basic thread dyed to match. There's
Yeah.
specific threads as well, and there's different levels of quality. So that was
Yeah.
another thing that came
And
into my mind.
different thicknesses. We're dealing with this with a client right now where they have a thread that's breaking in a
Mm.
very crucial area of a garment. And so we're going to start playing just with the thickness of the thread. We know it's the right type of thread, but maybe we need it to be a little bit heavier. And so there is a lot about thread education that you can go out there and do text weights, types of thread. You can reach out to A&E or Coates. Both of them tend to have some great thread classes that you can take and understand all about threads. There's so much to learn about threads and stitches, but and so we're not going to go
Not an
into all of it
afterthought,
today, but
right?
yeah, that could be a totally other class, and that would be a really good one. But yeah, if you have something specific, you should call it out because otherwise they could, just like Britta said, use the wrong thing, and then the quality of your garment is going to suffer because of that. So next, real quick, I want to talk just a little bit about grade rules versus graded measurements. What are the difference between these? So your grade rules are basically going to be your amount of change or your delta amount. It's a rule that you're going to set so that a waist circumference is going to get this much bigger or this much smaller for every single size for every single garment that I'm creating. And what this does is it helps to create consistency and fit so that if I'm a medium at your brand, I know that no matter what I buy, I should be able to go buy a medium. If I'm a small, et cetera, et cetera. The measurements, the graded measurements, are the actual specifications that we require for that one style. So your tech pack should include both. This is my grade rule. I'm going to have the waist change 2 inches down for a small and then an extra small, 2.5 inches up for a large, extra large, etc. But the measurements are actually 30, 28, 26, etc., etc. And so, what that's going to do, number one, is to help your factory understand what your grade rule is so that they can set that up in their system because they're going to need to make your markers for you and they're going to need to make all those various sizes for you on the pattern. What it also does is it gives them their standards for your exact measurements that you expect to see on your garments so that when you're going through a quality assurance check at the end of production and they're checking key measurement points, they know exactly what each size should measure.
Do you refer to any specific standardized grade rule like Alvanon or anything like that? Or do you really, is it up to the client? Do you have any recommendation on that? Because I know there's kind of standardized American fit or European fit that you could get a reference kind of chart maybe to see what the grade rules are.
Yeah. So I will say this. I've actually had some really good conversations with the Alvanon team about this because I have an Alvanon mannequin and got really into it with them at one point. The Alvanon standard that is out there is a great way to build your body size chart. So if you're out there and you're putting a website out and you are offering, extra small through extra large, and you have the ability to reference Alvanon, that's a great way to put out into the world and help your customer understand what size they are based on a body size chart that Alvanon could provide to you. For better or worse, what we've learned by doing a lot of different exercises in the industry is that a body size chart should and needs to be different from your grade rule. The way that garments and fabrics stretch around different parts of the body and at different sizes, and the way that we expect garments to fit different bodies in different ways require your graded measurements to be slightly different than the measurements on your body size chart. So when we, for example, if you go to thebusinessofapparel.com, we have a shop where you can get our suggested graded measurements. It comes with a full how to measure manual. It also comes with a body size chart suggestion, and they are different from each other. And so we're actually getting those out into the world, trying to teach people that these are different things. And so to that end, what we really like to do is work specifically with our clients to build a grade rule and a graded measurement worksheet that's specific to their target avatar. So their target client and exactly that type of body, like a cyclist's body is very different from a marathon runner's body, which is very different from a yogi's body. Mm-hmm. And so what we want to do is take all of that into consideration and make sure that when we're building our grade rule for those types of bodies, that it's specific to who they're trying to sell to. And so that's not a great answer because it's actually a lot of work.
Way more complicated than that, right?
Yeah, it's very, very complicated. And there are a lot of experts out there who have their expertise and specialize in building grade rules. I would say that's one of our gifts here at Unmarked Street, is being able to do that as well. But it's hard to find a standard that's gonna work for you unless you are building pretty typical like t-shirts, pants, things like that, that maybe you could apply something standard to at first. I would then say the next best thing to do once you start to get some customer feedback is to listen to your extraneous sizes the most. So for example, if you're putting out a medium, you started with the standard grade rule from Alvanon, I would start reaching out to everybody who's buying an extra large and everybody who's buying an extra small to say, is it too big? Is it too small? Is it too tight somewhere? Is it too big somewhere? And that way you can start to hone in on exactly how your grade needs to be adjusted for your customers. And then you can start making adjustments from there.
Yeah. And it's so important to check a full size range too, right? Yes. I know that gets costly and may not be for every smaller designer, but if you're going to produce that size range, it is important at some point to get one of every size and make sure that it is working. And that's your grading and making sure it's fitting the way you want it to. So
yeah, we have an amazing client who took a lot of extra time to do her grade rules when she was up front. And so she got one big size set in, every single size of the style that she was making, sent it out to as many people as she could, gathered all the feedback, and adjusted her grade until it was perfect for her brand. But that was like a year of extra work. I'm not going to lie. It is a lot of data points that you need to be looking at. And so it's kind of up to you whether you want to get product out there and start testing it and then start gathering that feedback, or if you want to do the work up front. Obviously, you could also hire someone who's been an expert in that for a really long time and can help suggest better grade rules for you. Mm-hmm. And so there are different tools that you can definitely access out there. But this is an example of how you would fill out your graded measurement worksheet in a tech pack. And so you would have what we call your points of measure over on the left, which is all of the different areas of the garment that we're going to measure. Then you get into your tolerance, which basically means for production, how much are we allowing this measurement to be off from what we asked for? So smaller things and things that we want to be very, very perfect, we have a very small tolerance for. So like a back neck drop that only measures an inch, we can only allow for an 1/8 variance there. So when production comes in, it can measure either 7/8 or 1 1/8 inch, and it's totally acceptable. For bigger areas, we need to allow for bigger tolerances. And then we apply our grade rule, different points of measure, and this is what your measurement worksheet looks like. Your sample comments page is then going to be a key page for you to copy and reuse over and over again as many times as you can. And so what we're doing in here is we're basically copying our points of measure, our requested measurement, and then when we receive a prototype or a sample, we're going to measure it ourselves, and then we're going to put into that measured column what the actual sample measured, and then we're going to calculate out via a formula how different was it from what we requested. And that way, at a glance, when we're sitting in our fitting and we're going through that process with our team, we can see right there how different or how off was the garment from what we requested. Once we go through the fitting, we're going to write up comments and we're going to separate them out into different sections so that it's really easy for our vendor to read. We're going to make small notes within the actual points of measure section. And then we're going to update all of those measurements to what we expect the next time so that they can see the entire thing on one page and understand exactly what we did during that fitting.
Comments are so critical and important.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Back in
Yeah.
the day, we used to handwrite them in a notebook, and then we'd try to go and type them maybe in an email. And
Yes.
then, and then you could be tracking 3-4 rounds of fits. And then if you don't have this system in place, you're like, oh, wait, we told them to do this like
Yeah.
3 months ago. And so all these details are so critical to keep
Yeah,
track
and this is
of.
a great page to go back to then when you receive your next prototype and sample. So you can say, oh, this is what we did last time. This is what we requested. Did they do it? And
Mhm.
then move forward essentially in the exact same way for the next round. And a couple things about comments here, real quick. Number one, I like to separate them out, like I said, into different sections. So pattern revisions, measurement notes, construction notes, trim notes, fabric notes, anything else. And then very clearly saying what are our next steps so that they know what they're doing next.
Mhm.
I also learned throughout my career that putting the most important thing at the top of each section is going to be key, because sometimes if you have a lot of comments like this, sometimes depending on who your factory is, they may start to ignore comments 10 and 11.
Yeah.
They
I'm
may get,
tired.
yeah, yeah. They may get to a point where they're like, okay, we've made a lot of revisions to this. Let's just go with this and see what happens next time.
Mhm.
And
And don't
so,
forget, they're most likely translating this into a different language.
yes,
So it's a lot of
exactly.
work to go through 12 comments.
Yeah. And so putting the most important things at the top are going to help you make sure that you get at least those most important things done at every round. Photos are also key. We like to take before and after photos if you can. If you have any close-up photos of anything that you drew on the garment or pinned on the garment, that can be really crucial to helping exactly what happened on your sample. And then we also like to include a change log. So we're always kind of tracking who changed the tech pack on what date and what did we do during that change, so that we can constantly be seeing like, oh, this is how many fit rounds we've had on this style, or so and so changed this last time. Let's go back to them and ask some questions to make sure that we captured everything, or whatever it needs to be. This is an important page though, so that everyone can kind of see the history of the style. Okay. So that's the tech pack. That template is going to be available to you that you can download and use over and over again. If you have any questions on it, you can definitely reach out to me. I'm happy to answer those questions, but hopefully that was a pretty good review. I know we've used a good chunk of time here. That was the majority of our presentation, but I would like to get a little bit into how to run a great fit session. And we have another free resource for you. We have what we call our fit protocols and checklists. So when I was working at Pearl Izumi, we were having a situation where all of our fittings were starting to go really long and everybody was working really slow. And so our lead developer at the time put together a protocol and checklist, which I've since kind of zhuzhed and changed and put out kind of into the world as a way to guide people into your fitting if you're having the same issues. And so what it kind of does is helps to lay out whose roles are in each section of the fitting, who should be doing what. And then as you go through the checklist, it also helps you go from top to bottom of your garment, fitting every single portion so that you don't forget anything or get back to your desk and go, oh no, I forgot to look at the collar. It's right there on your checklist so that you don't forget.
I wish I had that tool in my previous work. Yeah, and from in my career too, we've had fit sessions where you have 10 people in the room.
Yes.
And you as the designer, it's your vision of what you're trying to achieve, but then you've got all these other, we had merchandisers in there, or, all the developers, and everybody has a comment, and everybody's might be thinking it should be done a different way. And so it's like ultimately who's making that final decision, who's in charge, who's the lead. So this is so great to have some protocol and process available to follow.
Yeah, and we like to hand this out. Obviously, we give it out for free. This is one of our free downloads that you can get from us. And it's important that you take it to your team and go through it with them so that you can change it a little bit for what's right for your brand or your company too. You don't want to force people into a protocol or a process that doesn't make sense.
Mhm,
Include them in your desire to set a protocol and to set a process for this and let them know why and then let them be a part of that. But this gives you a really good starting point.
mhm.
So a little while ago, I think earlier this year, we actually did a funny little video where I stood in as all the different fitting roles in a fitting, and we did a little demo on YouTube. And so I wanted to show this video today to kind of go through what the different roles are that you can expect to see in your fitting. So we're going to change it up here a little bit. I'm going to show you this video. It's important to remember that everybody's role in a garment fitting is key, but there are different responsibilities that each of us hold. So, as the technical designer, it is first my job to make sure that everybody remembers what we did in the last fitting and knows exactly what it is that we're fitting. I'm also going to go through all of my pre fitting notes. So, anything that I noticed when I put the garment on the mannequin, maybe I tried it on myself and noticed that something was a little bit uncomfortable. I'm going to go through the measurements that I got when I measured the garment and note anything that was out of tolerance. Before the fitting begins, it's also my job to make sure that I get before photos so that the factory can see what the garment looks like on the body before we put any pins or markings on it. I'm going to make sure that everything inside the fitting follows the design brief that we received for the style. And essentially, this is my fitting to run. I own this meeting, and this is my responsibility to make sure that it goes the way it's supposed to. My biggest role during the fitting is to pin, mark, cut, change the garment however I need to while I'm talking to my designer and my pattern engineer to make sure that the next round of prototypes is going to be better and improved. Last but definitely not least, it is my job when the fitting comes to a close to recap the entire thing from top to bottom. You'd be surprised how many things we miss as we start to really get into a fitting. Notes that we made at the beginning might not be able to still be made by the end of the fitting, so we need to rectify that and go through a recap to make sure that we caught everything. I'm responsible for taking after photos so the factory can see exactly what we did. And when the fitting is over, I will be going back to my desk and updating all of the measurements in the tech pack so that when my developer sends it to the factory, the measurements are all updated for them. As the developer, it is my role to take all the notes during the fitting because I'm going to need to communicate them to the factory after the fitting is over. So it's super important for me to be organized and make sure that I'm listening to everything that's going on. It's also my job to negotiate the costs with the factory. So before the fitting starts, I likely want to share the latest cost quote with my product manager to make sure that the margin is where they want it to be. When the fitting is over, it's my job to number one, update all of the comments, make sure that the tech pack is ready to go, and also double check with all of my teammates that they made all of their tech pack updates accordingly and correctly. It's my job to make sure that the tech pack is accurate. I'm going to send it out to the factory and help them with any questions that they have. As the garment designer, it's one of my jobs to make sure that I sit with my technical designer during the pre fitting so that I know what's wrong with the garment before I even get into the room. I need to make sure that I bring with me all of the detail sketches and the tech pack to make sure that I'm matching what I wanted aesthetically with the garment with what's actually happening during the fitting. I need to make sure that we talk about all logo placements. If there's a graphic, if there's a print, how do I think it looks? Do I like the colors if we're checking for color? If there's a pocket, do I like where it's placed? Is it too big? Is the zipper where I want it to be? I get to make all of these aesthetic choices and changes during the fitting. It's also my responsibility to make sure that I'm taking notes during the fitting so that when I get back to my desk afterwards, I can make all of the updates to the sketch that I need. It's also my responsibility to make sure that the visual line plan with all of the colorway sketches match the latest sketch. So there's quite a bit of work for me to do when we're done here.
Love it.
As the pattern engineer, it is my job to make sure that I'm checking all of the digital pattern shapes before we even come into the fitting. So when the factory sends the prototype, they should also be sending their digital pattern file so that I can check to make sure they followed all of the revisions that I requested last time. I'm going to lay the patterns on top of each other, check to make sure that everything was changed properly, and then I'm going to print out those pattern revisions and bring them with me to the fitting so I can look at the shapes and help to make suggestions as we're going through the tech design portion of the pinned fitting. After the fitting, I'm going to go back to my desk and work my pattern magic. I'm going to make actual revisions to the digital pattern itself, or I am going to put very clear comments together for the factory to execute on their own. I'm the product manager of this style. And as the product manager, it's my job before the fitting to make sure that I work with our lead developer on all of the costing. I need to throw the latest cost quotes into my line planning spreadsheet to make sure that the margins are healthy and we're hitting our target costs. During the fitting, I need to make sure to bring my original product brief that I wrote so that we can ensure we're following it and hitting all of the key aspects that the garment needed to hit. After the fitting, there's not necessarily anything for me to do with the tech pack, but there's plenty else on my plate, so I'm always busy. If you found this video helpful, please. All right.
I love the multiple personalities that you have.
Different outfits were fun to get into. Here at Unmarked Street.
Oh, that's great.
How do we go to the next one? Sorry.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, we had fun with that. Dressing like the designer and the crazy pattern engineer with the 2 sets of glasses on. That was
I love the designer. Yeah.
Yeah.
The creative.
But that's, I think, a really good example of how, if you have all of those roles at your brand, how the different roles can play together and how it can be really crucial to make sure that you're all coming together for your key part of each fitting. And so our fit protocols and checklists kind of go into that even a little bit more. And then the key items that you want to be hitting for your fit process. Pre-fitting and prepping garments is really, really important. Making sure that you're measuring the whole thing, reviewing the construction before you get in there. And if you can pre-fit it on a body or on a mannequin, that can be a great way to start taking notes before you even get in the room, which helps expedite the entire process. Mannequin versus on-body fittings. Sometimes, so for example, I keep going back to my time at Abercrombie because I feel like they were really dialed in a lot of these processes. And we would do pre-fittings on a mannequin because the mannequin is essentially a perfect rendition of what your body type is, right? So if your mannequin is perfect, and you start to notice issues with the garment on the perfect body or on the perfect mannequin, that is going to help you understand upfront what might need to be done to get that fit improved. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, though, your mannequin's never going to be able to give you feedback verbally. And so you also need to be able to throw it on a body, a correct size body, as close as possible to ideal, so that someone can tell you if something's pinching, if something feels too tight, if it's uncomfortable in any area. And so while the 3D fittings is coming up, and that's become a really big thing recently, or AI renditions of apparel, it's going to be really important that we continue to throw it on bodies and real humans to understand if the garments really feel good. And especially if you're doing performance apparel in any way, someone is running or while someone is doing yoga or while someone is cycling, in that actual motion, does the garment feel good? Because you don't want them thinking about their apparel when they're trying to perform. You just want them to be thinking about their performance.
And we would do hours and hours of actual wear testing with samples. You'd put it out there. And again, it adds time to your development process. But if it's not performing the way it needs to for a triathlete, then it's a total waste. So
exactly. Exactly. And we build in additional weeks even into our calendars for really robust wear testing so that we can get them to different people and allow people to wear, wash enough times to also see how the washing of a garment will affect its fit. And so you'd be surprised at what we can learn in that phase too. So we definitely build in a lot of time for wear testing and performance.
I'll make a comment also of many times it's happened to us is that we would get a second or third prototype in and we would do the pre-fitting. And sometimes the tolerance was so off or something was so wonky that we would cancel the fit session because it wasn't even worth, why fit something that's out of tolerance. So that can happen too, where you'll get your next prototype in, but if it's not falling into the measurements or some construction is off, like don't even bother, paying
Yeah.
a fit model and bringing the team together. You just reject it. It's okay to reject something and not waste the time and ask them to fix it before you do your next round.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you would be surprised how many people have been shocked to hear that you can just reject a fit
Yeah.
sample. Like when you receive something, if it's not what you asked for and it's that far off, you absolutely can just let your factory know. And that's the correct terminology too. You just want to say the sample is rejected. We need to
Mhm.
go back and make a new one. And what is important there though too is still making your comments and still sending them what you found and why you're rejecting it so that they can make sure they correct that.
Yeah. It's not that 1/8 inch tolerance on the neck. It's an
No, yeah,
inch long. So
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So, here I just want to mention as well partnering with your pattern engineer can really elevate you in your role as a technical designer. And while it might not be exactly your job to also be the pattern engineer, a lot about great technical design is about the pattern. And so, if you have the ability to kind of think in the way a 3D garment is going to look on a 2D pattern, or how a 2D pattern is going to have to be manipulated or changed to make the garment better, it is just really going to accelerate your career. It is going to make you a much better technical designer. And so, putting a little bit of time, I think, into learning about patterns, if that's not something you've already done, can be really crucial to helping you. Like I mentioned in the video, some of the best fittings I've ever been in are when we brought our pattern screenshots with us. So if,
Mm.
oh, this seam looks really weird, it's not fitting quite right, we could look at the pattern shapes and go, oh, well, no wonder there's like such a weird shape going on this pattern. Let's just shave off this curve a little bit and we'll be good to go. The other thing to mention here is that as you start to cut or pin a garment, if you can understand how patterns are going to work with that cut or the pin, like for example, sometimes we'll put a pin in the middle of a center front of a garment, but there's nowhere for us to actually take that fabric out. And so, as long as we're driving those pins closer to a seam, or we have some way of darting from a different area, or slashing and spreading the pattern so that it actually makes sense into what we're doing with our pins and our cuts, you are going to have a much faster turnaround time from your factory if they're doing your patterns for you, or you're going to make it a lot easier on your own pattern engineer to do all of that work after the fitting. And then similarly, you just want to be communicating a lot with your pattern engineer if you can during your fitting. If you are having fittings and you have a pattern engineer on your team, or maybe you have someone contracted to do that work, I really recommend inviting them so that they can see what's going on in the fitting and they can make suggestions to you live on what you're doing in the fitting so that you can both be on the same page with what needs to happen afterwards.
Rachel, do you have any favorite pattern software programs that you work with?
Yeah, I have been using Clo 3D. I actually really like Clo 3D because it is number one so accessible to so many people. The monthly subscription fee I think is only like 50 or $60 compared to a lot of the other really expensive pattern engineering software that's out there. I learned originally on Gerber, so I know that that is also a really solid system, but it can be pretty pricey. I also ended up getting into Optitex later in my career and really love Optitex, but it is also a more expensive solution. So it kind of depends on where you're at and what kind of money you can spend. But if you're interested in just getting into it a little bit, I tend to recommend Clo 3D as an easy entry point.
Yeah, and I do know they have, I think, a free 30-day trial, plus
Yeah.
they have don't they have tutorials as
They
well?
do. There's a lot of tutorials walking you through how to learn the system, how to get good at not just the 2D part, but also the 3D renderings that come out of it. Chloe, I think, has done a really good job about making those tools accessible to so many people and helping us learn how to use it.
Yeah, and most of the factories that you work with can, access those files and read them, and you could email them and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, typically you have to download them as .dxf files. That's usually the standard that we use in the pattern making world. But Clo or Optitex or Gerber all allow for that. They all can download as .dxf files, and then you can send those to the factory, and then they can open them in their own system and read them directly.
So what if you do your own patterns, paper patterns, and you're again a solopreneur, you're doing flat pattern design, you're cutting and doing all that yourself, and then you have your paper pattern ready to go to a
Mhm.
factory. What would you recommend of how they digitize it, or how do they pass that to the factory if they're in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, so you're bringing me back to the old days where we used to do everything by hand on paper, which I love. I still love doing that. So number one, what I would recommend is that you make a copy of your pattern, like a full scale. If you have access to a copy machine, make a full scale copy of your pattern. And we used to do this in a really clunky way. Like we would take the pattern and we would lay it out on the copy machine and we would like move it around until we had
Oh,
it all like
we would
copied.
tape them cut
Yeah, then
into
we tape them together. We
yep,
would. We would cut up the pieces of paper and we would tape them together so that we had a copy.
yep,
And if you do that, what you can then do is send that paper pattern to your factory for them to use. They will digitize it into their own system, and then they will create your garment from that. But again, I always recommend that you have that copy so that you don't send them your only version.
yeah,
The
yep,
other option that you can do is to hire a pattern engineer locally or here in the US who has a digitizing table. And so you can send them your paper pattern and ask them to make it digital for you. There's essentially this large table with this like mouse looking thing, and you kind of click it at all the different corners and you create curves. And they can digitize it into the computer for you so that you can then send it as a DXF.
yeah, yep. We've done that in the past too, and yeah, it's sometimes you just don't have the technology or software to be able to do it yourself,
Yeah.
and so
And
it's
that's
great.
totally fine. Yeah.
There's
And
still
so
right?
like a pattern making book and doing it by hand is still totally doable. Like that's something you can absolutely do. And let's say you want to sew your first few samples at home to make sure that they're going to fit the way you want. Like you can use all of that work in such great ways by then taking that pattern and getting it into the system.
And what are your thoughts on giving a factory a prototype that you've done when you're just starting?
I I think it's a great way to start, especially if it's fitting and constructed the way that you want. I do want to throw out a caveat though that what you're going to sew at home or even what a sample sewer is going to sew for you is likely going to differ just a little bit from what the factory is going to give back to you. So I like to encourage my clients to only go so far with in-house prototypes. Maybe we only do 1, 2, or a maximum 3 rounds before we start to get the factory involved, because we want to start seeing what their sewing is going to look like, what their fit is going to look like, what their construction is going to look like. At the end of the day, there's just always going to be a little bit of a difference because we're humans and your sewing technique is going to be a little bit different from mine. And so we want to make sure that we're starting to evaluate what they're going to provide to us in production more than just like what we can sew at our own sewing table.
Mhm. And they might have a process that's gonna be quicker, more efficient, a
Yes.
different machine, so the stitch will look different, and they know the production, what do you call it? Like, the flow of production
Yeah,
is
like the orders of operation. Yeah.
yes, exactly, and then it could differ, and, yeah, so it's something we talk about quite a bit is, do we send them a prototype first, or do we spend the money to make
Yeah.
those samples here to show them, or do we just give it to the factory with the tech pack, and there's costs to
All
evaluate
of
too,
it. Yep. Mhm.
so working with the factory, they might end up including the cost of your development into the overall production. So, yeah, just I think communicating and discussing with your partners is important to figure out what's gonna work best for everybody.
Exactly. Asking all of those questions. Have you worked with this factory for a while? Do you trust them? Or is there some stuff that like maybe you're brand new with them and you do want to get them some examples of what you think, your quality standard is and all of that. There's a lot that goes into that decision. I totally agree with you. And so just like you said, asking a lot of questions and kind of figuring that out and then feeling what you're comfortable with too.
Mhm.
And maybe doing some cost comparisons, like what would their development fees be versus hiring a seamstress or the time that it would take for me to actually do the sewing myself.
Mhm. Yeah. A couple things we've done too is mock-ups of
Yeah.
maybe just a section, just a pocket.
Yes.
If you have a pleated box pocket, you can just get a swatch with the
Yep.
pocket on it or a ruffle on a neckline or maybe there's a special button piping construction or something, you can just request like a little mock-up too before they go into the full garment to make sure it's going
Yeah.
to work in production and look the way you want, and the cost for those special details too. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say the more you can provide images, photos, or real life examples for your factory, the better you're going to probably get that proto back because they can actually see what you're looking for and what you want.
again, those visuals, because it's
Yeah,
not, most likely English is not their first language. So those visuals are really, really important.
exactly. The more you can do that, the better. So, we have a few different ways that you can learn more about these different topics. We have some educational classes going on right now called The Business of Apparel. This teaches you basically all of the major secrets that are kind of going on in the biggest brands in our industry. Like, what are they doing when they're line planning every season? What are they doing when they're picking a target customer? And so, I've taken a lot of that knowledge of what I've gathered through the last 15 years of my career
Mm.
and put that into an online course. So we're selling that now. It comes with 3 months of support from me and my team. You can join this cohort, you become part of our community. We help make sure that you understand everything as clearly as possible. We are also working on a couple of new courses called Fit Mastery and Tech Pack Mastery, which will really take what we kind of went through today and blow it out even more. And so we do have all of our tools online. You can go to thebusinessofapparel.com. And if you're interested in taking any of these courses with us, we're going to be giving you guys a 20% discount with code IFD if you're purchasing through Inside Fashion Design. So a lot of great resources for you there. We have other templates and tools and all kinds of different stuff that you can get on our website. And you can also reach out to us anytime. These are our websites. We would love to hear from you and hear what you thought about the course, or send questions our way on anything that you have.
Such great information. I absolutely love it. And it's so important for everyone to understand it, even if you're not one of those multiple personalities that you shared with us today. It's important to understand as a designer, or someone just starting a business or working in the industry, to understand like what has to happen. And it's cost, efficiency, it's time, it's effort, it's people putting in their energy to make all those things happen. So having that understanding, I think, like you were saying in an interview earlier, if you have that knowledge, share that you've taken the course, that you have an understanding of the process, and that's going to just make you more valuable in the industry, whether it's in your own work or working for a brand. But like Rachel said, thank you for joining us. And you can reach out to either one of us. We're here to help you. And you can also find us on LinkedIn or just Google us. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions about this as well. We have other classes coming up. Rachel, you had mentioned costing and margins, which again is so critical as part of the process. And if your margins are not meeting your goal, or your costs are just too high and you're not going to hit that price point for your customer, then again, it's kind of a total waste of cost and development. And so we are having a course for costing and setting up your business, and how to price garments, and looking at margins, how to set margins, what are your goals. So check those out as well. And thank you for offering our viewers and students of this class the discount. Your resources are invaluable, and we appreciate partnering with you. So thank you, Rachel, for your time. Thanks everyone for joining us in this session, and we'll see you on the next one.